Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. I'm not too terribly comfortable speaking well of Karl Marx. I venture to guess that if we were to make a list of the people whose ideas have had the most destructive impact in the history of the world, that Karl Marx would be pretty high on that list. That said, he did have a moment of insight, however unintentionally it may have been, or as they say, every now and again, even a blind squirrel can find a nut. Well, what was that moment in Marx's life? Well, he said this. He took this notion of the nature of mankind, and of course, so much of the destructive power of his ideology came from his materialistic worldview that saw man as essentially a machine and history as a machine, and it was going to end up in this inevitable place. And out of that, or in the midst of that, he came up with his own sort of renaming of what man is. The common Latin term that we have used over the years for mankind is Homo sapien, which means man the wise. But it was Marx, again, in defense of his idea that it's economic forces that shape reality, who described man instead as Homo faber. Homo faber, F-A-B-E-R, which means man the maker. Well, I think he was on the mark there precisely because I think this is one of those places, one of the most significant places where our understanding of who God is and our understanding of who man is intersect. You know, it was John Calvin who, in the beginning of his classic work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, makes the case that if you really want to understand who God is, you need to understand who man is. And if you really want to understand who man is, you need to understand who God is. Well, man is a maker. This is essential to what we are. We were put in the garden and given the charge to work. It's a very simple but destructive mistake to look at the reality that after the fall of Adam and Eve, God placed a curse on mankind's labor, which is true, but it's not true that labor itself is a curse. Labor itself is a blessing. We were made to reflect God's image in receiving the dominion mandate, which should tell us something about who God is. God is the God who makes. Now, when God makes, he makes ex nihilo, out of nothing. He's not the God who remakes or who reshapes. When we look at God's ownership of the universe, it's not like a European explorer coming to the New World and planting his flag on the beach and claiming the land for his sovereign. God didn't discover reality and say, I hereby declare that this is mine. Once there was God and nothing else. And isn't it interesting that the very, very first thing that the Bible tells us about God is that he creates. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Verse 1 of the Bible. God is a maker. God is a creator. God takes nothing, which again, we have to be careful not to confuse and end up turning it into something. Nothing is not a substance that God uses to make reality. Nothing is non-thing, no thing, non-being. And God speaks. God says, let there be light. And there was light. This tells us not only about God's character, about his attributes, it also tells us about the power of his voice. I've often described it this way, that God's voice is to reality what Midas's touch was to gold. You remember in that legend, King Midas was so greedy, and he acquired the power that such that anything he touched would turn to gold. And of course, it ended up causing him great misery because things that he loved that he didn't want to have turned into gold and died. Well, that's not the case with God. God doesn't have those kind of regrets. But it is the case that just as when Midas touched something and turned to gold, when God speaks something, reality happens. I think it's important for us to seek to grasp this glorious truth. We've talked about it in the past. We did a segment on God's omniscience, that God knows all things. And this should help us remember, again, the simplicity of God, that God is not a stack of attributes, but he is one. So when we recognize that, and we recognize his omniscience, his knowing all things, I want us to grasp that he doesn't know all things because he studied all things. He doesn't know all things because he came to all things and his mind was able to comprehend all things. That would be amazing. But the reality is the inverse of that. That's an inside-out understanding of the case. Reality is not something that God knows, but God knows and it becomes reality. God makes in his thought, in his thinking, in his speaking. He thinks it, and it is so. Not it is so, and so he thinks it. That's astonishing. Which should help us understand why the dominion mandate is so important. We don't make something from nothing, but we do make things from other things. We're not God. We're God's image bearers. And when we exercise dominion, we're in a manner of speaking, just like an image in the mirror is not me. It takes me, which is three-dimensional, and makes a representation of me in two dimensions. In the same way as we exercise dominion, we take God's three-dimensional creative work by which he speaks reality into nothing, and we copy it in two dimensions where we take what he has made and we remake it. As I'm recording, I'm sitting in my study. The chair that I'm sitting on is leather, and across the room is my wooden desk, the desk that once belonged to my father. There's my father's cane hanging up on that bookshelf. There's some cloth that I was gifted when I traveled to Myanmar to teach over a decade ago here in the office. All these things, friends, in one way or another, used to be dirt. Men took these things and they cultivated in the dirt the grass that was then given to the cow, that became the leather, that became the chair. They grew the trees out of the dirt and took the trees and shaped it into the desk that sits over there and into my father's wooden cane. The dominion mandate matters. Your work matters because you reflect the character of God who speaks and reality happens. I think it's been quite a while since I stretched this point, and so I'm going to give myself room to do so again. If you have an interest in music, and more particularly Christian music, and if your interest in Christian music extends into what might loosely be called indie rock, then you might know the fellow that I'm going to talk about, who has been a hero to me for, probably close to 20 years. But to tell you his story, I want to tell first about the very first time that I met this fellow. I had been invited to come and speak at a summer camp family conference kind of event, the kind of invitation that wasn't all that unusual for me. It was being put on by my friend Kevin Swanson and the church that he serves there in Colorado, though we met at the giant Southern Baptist camp, Glorieta, in New Mexico. Well, I was there and going to be speaking for the very first night, and I was in the auditorium waiting to go up there and speak when I was introduced, or everyone was introduced, to the musical guest who had been invited. And onto the stage walked this very tall, thin, mildly scruffy looking young man dragging a guitar along behind him. And I thought to myself, I'm guessing this is going to be some sort of soft-spoken, guitar-strumming Christian singer that's going to sort of almost whisper his way through his music. And this is really not my style. I'm going to be a good sport, and I'm not going to be grumpy about this. And I'm just going to sort of hold my breath until he's done, and then I'll get on with what I have to say. And the fellow sat down and he started strumming his guitar. And he started singing Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's, and all it contains. And it was a complete 2x4 across my forehead, not because it wasn't what I predicted it would be, but because it was what I predicted it would be, and it completely blew me away. He was strumming his guitar. He was singing softly and lightly. He was earnest. He was Christian, and he was true. His name is Nathan Clark George. Little did I know at that point that not only did I have this deep and abiding love of the music that this fellow was able to make, but that we would become friends, and as well that he was the grandson of one of my heroes you have heard of, Dr. Gordon Clark, whose books Thales to Dewey and A Christian View of God and Man and things that I have highlighted in our Cultivating Your Book Library segment. This is the grandson of the great Gordon Clark, professor of philosophy, who spent many years not far from where I am right now, teaching at Butler University, and after retirement spent a few years teaching a little bit down at Covenant College in Lookout Mountain. Well, Nathan and I got to know each other, and I discovered a friend who was perfectly willing to listen to me and instruct me. We had these wonderful conversations, both about his grandfather and philosophy and theology, but also about music and how music happens and what it means. And boy, howdy, he was just such a, what's the word for it? Kindred spirit. The only difference between Nathan Clark George and I is that he's tall and I'm short. He's thin and I'm fat. He's got a thick head of hair and I'm bald. And he's got talent. And I don't. But in God's providence over the years, I got to have other speaking events where our paths crossed. I had him come and not only sing but speak at a conference that I put together. He was, at that point, he was traveling around the country with his wife, Patsy, and their children, homeschooling them, living out of an RV, trying to, minister with his gift, which gift is prodigious. And by the way, you can still get all this. For many years, when the first part of our relationship, he used to annually win the Artist of the Year at Indie Heaven, which was downloading site for independent artists, which doesn't surprise me. Just really, really gifted musician. In fact, he helped me understand. He said, the reason that you can enjoy the music that I play and maybe don't enjoy so many of the other strumming guitar guys is because my background, my foundation is jazz rather than pop. And while I might play in a more accessible style than an outright jazz guitarist, there are some complexities in what I'm doing that you wouldn't typically hear. And he would help to unpack some of those complexities for me. Keep in mind that I can't even play a single chord on the guitar, but he was just really, really helpful. It has been helpful, and a fine father and a husband, and listening to his music just has really blessed me. There's an openness, there's a sincerity, there's a what's the word for it? Integrity and a lack of pretense in what he's doing. And he is the same man off the stage that he is on the stage. He eventually went to serve alongside another friend of mine, George Grant, as the chief musician for a church there in Central Tennessee. And now he is serving at I believe it's Christ Community Church, or maybe it's called Redeemer, the great big PCA church outside of Charlotte, where Harry Reeder used to serve before going to Briarwold. That's where he's serving now. Just an honest, godly, God-fearing, humble man, musician, friend. I'd encourage you to check out his music, and if you have the opportunity, if you see him somewhere, get to know this fine man, get to know his wife Patsy, and their beautiful children. He's a hero. He's the kind of man that I aspire to be. I'm grateful to God for all the gifts that he's given to my friend Nathan Clark George, and for Nathan himself. As I'm recording, I've just finished my class that I'm teaching virtually for local community college here in Indiana on Introduction to Ethics. And this is my second time around of doing this, and I'm very much enjoying doing so. Very grateful for the opportunity to have an audience of people who are coming from profoundly different backgrounds than my own background, to practice the art of teaching in the same context as witnessing and evangelizing, seeking to learn to be gracious while confronting ideas that I think are less than healthy. And that has prompted me to try something new, to add another element to the things that we're doing here at Dunamis Fellowship. As many of you may know, I have served as not just a professor of philosophy, but also of apologetics at Reformation Bible College, and I've written articles and books on apologetics. I've spoken at apologetics conferences. I'm an apologist. And it struck me that it might be a helpful thing for me to serve those inside and those outside the kingdom by harnessing a little bit, as much as I'm able, the work of Google by bringing people to sound answers. And so what I've done is I've begun a new project. We might just call it simply for now the Ask RC project. And I'm working together with my friend David Knight, who, he's just a good friend and a great help. He is the creator of the website Exposit the Word, which is that website where my commentary on the audio commentary on the book of Genesis is being produced. Well, now we're adding to, he's helped me get to the place where technologically I'm able to post my podcast on YouTube, but also able to add these Ask RCs. And right now we have about 20 of these posted. Common questions. They're not all exclusively for non-Christians, but they're the kind of questions, again, that people just ask, that they would type into their search engine. Things like, why do Christians disagree so much? And that could be a question an unbeliever or a believer asks. Or what's the difference between the Christian religion and other religions? Or why do Christians not embrace the doctrine of evolution? Those are the kinds of questions that I've been wrestling with and trying to give brief, about 5 minutes, helpful, of course, but winsome answers that hopefully would encourage people to continue to ask fruitful questions. It's a project. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how it will grow, if it will prove to be fruitful and helpful, but I think it will. I mean, I think it's one of those places. It's an opportunity to leverage some of the gifts that, right or wrong, I think I have. I think I have the capacity to speak comfortably into the microphone, to answer questions with some level of winsomeness, and also some helpfulness. And so that's a part of what we're doing. And we would, as always, encourage those who are listening to this podcast to check out all the things that we're doing, to come and visit our Monday night Bible study, to come and to avail yourself of our blog at rcsprouljr.com, to check out these Ask RCs and other opportunities as well. Check out the Genesis commentary at Exposit the Word. I would love to have all of you who are enjoying the podcast to sort of see the different ways that we're trying to serve, the different ways that we're trying to do outreach, the different kind of ways we're trying to be used to proclaim the gospel to those who are still outside the kingdom. We've got lots of things going on, and we would like for you to be aware of them, to check them out, and again, potentially to be helped by them. If these brief 5-minute answers can be harnessed, they can be shared. If you're in conversation with someone and they ask one of these questions and you think the answer might be helpful, you'll be in a position to share it and just say, hey, go check this out. And let me know what you think. There's other questions there as well you might be interested in. I'd like for this to be a resource where people can get trustworthy, historically accurate, biblically faithful, evangelical, Protestant answers to questions that people ask inside the church and outside the church. I'd also like to believe that as this does serve other people, again, that it would be something that people would get behind and support. It is an additional thing on my plate, but as always, it is something I enjoy doing. But we continue to be in the place where we are in need of financial support. As always, I really it would crush me if there was anybody who was enjoying this podcast and they stopped listening because once a week I stop and say, hey, can you get behind us financially? And it makes you uncomfortable or it makes you mad and you tune out. Please don't tune out. Please just understand and stay with us and be blessed by what we're doing if you find it a blessing and you're not able to support it. But if you are, I would hope that you would be willing and able to come alongside so that we can serve other people. We can serve those people outside the kingdom who are looking for answers, or who, at least in looking for answers, even if they're doing it for the worst possible motives, can sort of stumble through the magic of Google onto something that might prove helpful for them. I'm hoping that more of you will partner with us as we seek to demonstrate and manifest and be useful in and through the dunamis power of our risen Lord, the resurrection power by which he escaped from that tomb, by which he took that which was dead and brought it to life. will you prayerfully consider supporting us, being a monthly donor, a partner with us, a one-time gift, any of those things. Again, as always, we are a 501c3. Donations are tax deductible. We're under the oversight and headship of the National Christian Foundation, an organization with the highest credentials and capacities and gifts. And again, we've made it easy. There's a donate button at rcsproulJR.com. Will you please? That's my question for you. That won't be one of the questions we'll post on the Ask RC. This is not a question to RC, but it's a question from RC. Will you please prayerfully consider coming alongside and supporting the work of Dunamis Fellowship? You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.